Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Trap Draw podcast. My name is Randy, and this is a fun episode. I'm actually not a part of this, I'm just doing the introduction. What this episode is a discussion between a couple of massive Simpsons fans, DJ Pyhowski and Jordan Perez, and they chat with Alan Seagull from The Ringer, who has a new book out. It's called Stupid TV, Be More Funny: How the Golden Era of The Simpsons Changed Television and America Forever. I think it's a great conversation. And let me just thank, because it's going to have something to do with what I'm about to say here. Let me thank our title sponsor. That is, of course, ServPro. ServPro is the number one brand in cleanup and restoration and is known for making any mess like it never even happened. With over 2,200 locations nationwide, they're faster to any size disaster. And my mea culpa is, as somebody that grew up, born in the early 80s, grew up through the 90s, I just never really got into The Simpsons. And I've certainly watched episodes. I know characters, but it just was never appointment viewing for me. I think there was something about animated shows that I've just never really been able to get into. I don't know, but I feel like I do need to issue a mea culpa, especially listening to this episode. I just know I missed out on a ton of fun, a ton of really smart, witty jokes and commentary, and just, yeah, a lot of laughs. So that's on me. I know the whole catalog exists. I don't know on what streaming platform, but maybe that's something I can go back and just start working my way through. So that's my ServPro mea culpa, and thank you to them for being the title sponsor of the Trap Draw. You can visit servpro.com or call 1-800-SERVPRO today. And without further ado, I'm going to get out of the way, and I hope everybody enjoys the episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Trap Draw podcast. My name is DJ, and we are going to be talking about something today that I'm borderline nervous to talk about because it is such a formative, foundational, gigantic part of my life, and that is the TV show The Simpsons. To help me break this down is my friend and colleague Jordan Perez. Jordan, hello, how are you?
Great, DJ. I am so excited to talk about The Simpsons, which is also a more formative than I realized part of my life.
Well, I have some questions about that before we get into it because we are going to be talking. The reason that we're doing this is we had a chance to talk to Alan Seagull, who just wrote an outstanding book about the kind of golden era of The Simpsons and the cultural impact that followed. And I feel like for me, The Simpsons is a pretty obvious connection. I'm a 37-year-old man who grew up watching The Simpsons, who grew up figuring, finding my sense of humor, finding my cultural references, finding all of these things through this TV show. You're quite a bit younger than me, and I'm a little curious how you came to this show because when we set up this interview with Alan, originally it was going to be he and I, and you're like, I hate to say it, I'm a pretty big Simpsons fan too, which was such a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I really had to reveal myself as a fan of The Simpsons when you said you were reading this book. I never dug into like the origins of or the lore of The Simpsons that much, so a lot of the information in the book was very new to me, which was great. I really love just experiencing things so freshly like that. But The Simpsons for me was I and we talk about this in our conversation with Alan. There's such a generational difference on how people are introduced to The Simpsons, and so for me, it was through Christmas Day in the mid 2000s when my mom gifted me The Simpsons Hit and Run for the GameCube. And our video games are an introduction to a lot of things in my life, that game is incredible. It's a sandbox style game that's basically a Grand Theft Auto parody. You're playing as mostly Homer, but a lot of different members of the Simpsons family and doing different missions and different side quests. And it's this really cool, expansive world that teaches you a lot about the Simpsons. And it gets so deep in a way that, like, I was a kid in the mid 2000s and, cable was still the thing. It's like I didn't really have access to Netflix or Disney Plus or any other streaming services to go and binge The Simpsons. And so it was like oh, I've learned about Mr. Plow, or I learned about who shot Mr. Burns, like, and just various episodes through this game and the characters themselves. And eventually, like, you kind of just develop a fondness for them. And, I had started watching some of The Simpsons on Fox, and my parents were people who had religiously tuned into The Simpsons in the '90s, and at the time, or I'm sorry, a few years later, like when they have me, I'm a kid, all that. I would say I don't want to say I was completely sheltered, but I was very sheltered in a way that like my parents were like, you can't watch MTV, you can't watch this, you can't watch that. The thought of me watching Jersey Shore or 16 and Pregnant, like that was not going to fly. I don't think I've seen an episode of either now that I say it out loud, but yeah, wasn't allowed to do those things, and I was a very rule observant kid. But I was allowed to watch The Simpsons, and a lot of the undertones and the subversive texts and different things like definitely went over my head as a kid. But there was enough to understand and latch onto in terms of storyline and characters and the larger world of Springfield that I loved. Deej, I guess I would love to hear more about your gateway to The Simpsons. Was it the TV show? Was it something else? And were you allowed to watch it?
I'm still taking in the idea of learning about Moe's Tavern and Mr. Plow and Krusty Burger and all these things through a video game. That is fascinating to me because yes, I kind of picked it up in the traditional way. I watched on Sunday nights on Fox, and then I watched every single weeknight. I think it was on, I think like 5 to 6, basically like 2 episodes back to back. And I watched it every single day. I've seen every, I feel like this is now expired. Where I used to be like, oh, I've seen every episode 100 times. That's not true anymore because the show has been on for 36, 37 years or whatever at this point. And so what I would say is I've probably seen every episode in the first 20 seasons that many times, but eventually it, kind of phased out of my life, and it's only kind of been upon revisiting it recently, and a lot of this is because my wife Justine was not a Simpsons kid or a Simpsons fan when she was a kid, and so she didn't really start watching it until I was like, "Hey, really till we got married." And it was like, "What do you do in the evening?" Well, I usually watch The Simpsons, and flipped it on, and it's just could not be more her sense of humor as well. And so we've had a really good time, like kind of diving back into a lot of these old episodes. She always makes fun of me because I'm like, "Oh, we got to watch. This is a good one. We got to watch this one." She's like, "Yeah, I mean, you say that about every episode," and that's true because they are all good ones. But to answer your earlier question, and we get into this with Alan a little bit too, I was not allowed to watch The Simpsons, at least kind of expressly. My mom was not a fan of The Simpsons and their kind of their tone, their lack of respect for their elders. A lot of these traditional family values that Alan kind of dives into in his book that get reflected back out through the mouth of President George Bush, and his pilgrimage or his kind of like holy war against the Simpsons, and saying we needed families more like the Waltons than the Simpsons. My mom's a big Waltons fan, but eventually that wall started to crumble a little bit, and once I kind of got to watch it, I mean, I was just fascinated by, again, I don't want to spoil the conversation, but Alan touches on this very briefly, that this feeling of the Simpsons feeling like the older brother kind of that I never had. I'm the oldest of three boys, and so I never really had that person that was like, "Hey, here's a box of CDs or albums or whatever. Like, why don't you try these on for size and see what you think?" I got all of that from The Simpsons, and what's so funny about it is that I don't think I realized at the time that like just how weird The Simpsons reference pool is. It's pulling from the 1930s in radio plays, and it's pulling from super cutting edge technology stuff, and it's pulling from obscure jokes that I didn't even realize were jokes, and all, so it all kind of added up to this really weird kind of stew of references, jokes, storylines, parodies. And I think part of the thrill was just kind of realizing as I got older how much of it was real, how much of it was parody. Oh, that actually came from that. And The Simpsons was kind of like my decoder ring for so many different parts of pop culture.
It always amazes me just how many parts of pop culture it really illuminates because, like, you could be so well versed in pop culture and, like, virtually get everything. And then you could be not that well versed in pop culture and, like, still have a really enjoyable time watching The Simpsons. And I know you mentioned how The Simpsons informed your sense of humor over time. I'm curious, like, going back and revisiting Golden Age Simpsons episodes, I mean, do you feel like they hit the same? Do they hit better? I mean, what's your takeaway?
It's a good question. At least as good, I would say. I went back and watched a bunch of them last night, just to kind of prep for this. And I still watch quite a bit. I'll fire it up every now and again and watch 2 or 3 episodes on Disney Plus or whatever. And I have a lot of seasons that I go back to, but I'm always astounded when I go back to kind of season 1, 2, 3, just how good those are. Because I think when I was a 10, 12-year-old kid, I think I saw a lot of those really early seasons as like, the animation's a little weird and
Yes.
the voices aren't as familiar as the voices that I know. And like I think I'm gonna kind of like not think about those and not watch those. And in reality, you go back and watch, especially like seasons 2, 3, and 4, and I mean, they just hit you right in the brainstem. Like they are so goddamn funny and smart and sentimental, and they're phenomenal. So I know I'm not breaking any ground. I know this show's been on for almost 40 years, and there's a reason for that. But headline you can print: Simpsons is good and holds up.
There's a really raw and transcendent quality about early Simpsons, which, yes, you don't quite get or appreciate until you're older. Because I was the same way. Like in the mid 2000s, the Simpsons looks completely different. There's a lot more polish to the animation, the voice acting, everything. It's hit its stride, and and I guess to varying opinions, right? Because Golden Age Simpsons basically ends before the new millennium, and I guess as a kid, and I guess I represent like maybe a different demographic here, but, like, I thought The Simpsons was good for past the golden age, and I
Totally.
really appreciated it.
No, it really
Yeah,
is, and I think that's something that gets lost. You know, it's not like it fell off an absolute cliff. Like I think
no.
what's really hard, and and again, we'll talk about this with Alan, is like it's just becomes this victim of its own success where it's like you can't, when you're comparing it to when it was the newest, most transcendent thing ever, like it's, yeah, of course it's not going to stack up to the electricity of basically just creating an entirely new, I don't even know, it's not even like a genre, it's almost like bigger than that, you know. And it's almost like he compares, or one of the writers compares the Simpsons to the Beatles as these two kind of like unanimously accepted, loved things. And in a way, it's almost like if the Beatles had just like kept making records for the next 37 years, it's like, yeah, man, I think maybe Beatlemania would have continued to die off a little bit. That'd be pretty understandable. That doesn't mean they wouldn't necessarily be like really crisp, you know, borderline perfect pop songs. It's just a matter of like you can't really sustain that energy for forever. So yeah, I do kind of do a little bit of a sanity check every now and again. I'm like, let me pop into season 31 and just see what's up. And I feel like walk away pretty delighted by the fact that like it still hits, it's still funny. There's still a lot to like, and I think that's why it's still on TV. But
It's the self-containment of it too. I mean,
yeah,
you can kind of jump in whenever.
yeah.
It's a little more fulfilling to kind of watch a little chronologically, but it's so open of a show, like that there's an entry point basically whenever.
Which and again, this is, it's so funny to hear kind of the video game being the genesis. I think for a couple reasons. One, The Simpsons just notoriously commoditized show. I mean, in a lot of ways, it became much more about, you know, even though the jokes are the best jokes ever told, it's like became a lot more about the merch and the action figures and the t-shirts and eventually the video games. So that's kind of funny. And two, not watching it like in its kind of normal way, or not coming to it in what I would say is like a little more normal way, like watching it on TV and then kind of branching out from there. Which characters really hit for you? I'm curious because that's such an interesting way to come to it.
I think I wanted to be as like cool and rebellious as Bart. I wanted to feel like I could be as humorous as Homer. You don't exactly want to be Homer, but you want to quite incite the laughter that he does. You want to be as responsible and loving as Marge. But ultimately, I go back to Lisa often, and her desire to, kind of just, I mean, she's constantly like trying to fight for what's right and err on the side of logic and just be the voice of reason all the time. Because I knew deep down as a kid, I was like, okay, like I identify so much with Lisa, but I'm like, oh, do I really want to identify with Lisa? I mean, she's just so easy to make fun of, and like she's just so easy to push into the background. Like, oh, do I really want to be here? As a kid, I totally, and like reading this book, I realized why I identified with him in a way. But now it's very cringy too. Comic book guy. My pretension as a kid, and my know-it-allism and general just like, I don't know, strong takes as a kid sounded a lot like comic book guy. And now I'm like, oh, that's terrible. I can't believe I was like that. And I hope I'm not like that to this day. But so I would say some weird intersection between Lisa and comic book guy. And I think I've since like found myself proudly being a little more Lisa these days. What about you, DJ?
Man, that's a good question. I think real quick on the Lisa front, I feel like they give you just enough glimpses. You know, there's enough flash forwards. There's enough tipping their hand. There's enough of those kind of like bittersweet moments of just telegraphing like, hey, I know this isn't ideal right now, but like you're gonna win. It's eventually
Yep.
going to be worth it. And I feel like they do telegraph that enough that even as a little kid, it's got to be there's got to be something that draws you to that person, which is something I've always really liked about it. But as far as like identifying, I God, I would hate to say that I identify with Millhouse at all, but there's probably something that makes me laugh so hard every time he's on screen. Just the absolute. I think the hardest, the hardest I think maybe I've ever laughed in my entire life is the scene where where Lisa's passing the note to Nelson, and it's just somebody likes you, and Millhouse is like the last guy in the chain that passes it to him, and so he looks back. Nelson looks back, and Millhouse kind of waves his eyebrows, and they cross cut to Millhouse being rushed into the ambulance, and it's just like the most shocking cut that I feel like I've ever seen. Again, I don't know if Millhouse necessarily is like someone that I see myself in, or I try really hard not to see myself in. But God, there's just something about these like really weird, weird kind of bolt-ons that really I'm drawn to. Most Zlak is the same way. It's just always like just happens to be a part of all my favorite moments in the show. I feel like Troy McClure is another one. Anytime Phil Hartman is on the show is up there. I don't know. There's just I keep coming back to I think those three really. It's like Troy McClure and Mo and Millhouse. So I hope I'm not like any of those, but it's God. If I could only watch three of them, I think they're up there, man. They're about as good as it gets. But
I think my favorite, I want to cut into favorite real fast though to shout him out. I have loved Abe Simpson ever since I was a kid. Gosh, some of the best jokes in the series. I think my favorite in particular, which is I think this is a pretty famous quote, but in the Homer Palooza when he's talking to Homer and he talks about I used to be with it, but then they changed what it was. Quote. I reference that so much in my daily life. Between myself and my mother, and just like I think you mentioned I don't remember what quote it was, but in our conversation with Alan that like you had a quote going on the back of your mind in your head, and it's like there's a wiring that the Simpsons conducts on its fans that like will have you thinking in Simpsons quotes constantly, reacting to real world situations, and you just have to live with it.
there's so many good Abe ones. The first one that always pops into my head, and again, it's like as a 10-year-old kid or whatever watching this is like I see maybe why some parents were not into this, but he's walking down the street and picks up the wrapper, and it's just is reading it. It's latex condom. Like boy, I'd like to live in one of those. Uh, I think is one that just hits me so frequently that I laugh so hard about. Tied an onion to my belt, which was the story at the time, or the style
Is
at
it
the time.
all the time?
There's just a million. God, I think, and actually, sorry, one more I need to shout out is Sideshow Bob as well. I think like I know they're probably not winning any awards for casting. I don't know if like they're running in those circles, but you know, I feel like Sideshow Bob, Kelsey Grammer, like that is it's the funniest matchup I think in history, and just constantly seeing him get foiled in all the different ways, and the just like dripping with disdain way he treats any kind of normal person is just God. It's so funny to me.
God,
So
he got under my skin so much as a kid, like, but I think now as an adult, I can have a different appreciation for Sideshow Bob.
well, before we get into our convo with Alan, any episodes you want to shout out? Any like if you haven't watched The Simpsons in 20 years, you go back and watch this one.
So sticking with the golden age, I think my two, I could maybe give like two or three faves. Lisa Substitute, which we do talk about in our conversation with Alan. I mentioned it, I think briefly. Scenes from the class struggle
Yeah.
is a great episode. Not because it is related to golf or has Tom Kite, just because I think it is a great episode specifically about Marge and Hurricane Nettie, because I think it is a great, one of the great most. One of the best fictional crash outs ever, truly. I love it, and shout out Ned Flanders, I should have
Yeah, we
thrown
haven't
him
even
into
talked
my
about him.
faves.
I
Yeah.
know. I will shout out if you're going back to watch A Millhouse Divided. I think is about as good as it gets. When Millhouse's parents get divorced, Kirk Van Houten I think is probably the most pathetic character ever put on a TV screen. I think, and his whole like, can I borrow a feeling? Do you sleep? I get to sleep in a race car bed. Do you?
No,
Do like, no, I sleep in a big bed with
I
my
forgot
wife.
about that one.
It's just God, it's so funny. It's so funny. The American Gladiator comes in. It's just it rules, man. That's one of my favorites ever. I'm trying to think what, and then we talk about it. I won't spoil it, but or double up the conversation. But the Frank Grimes episode, I think, is another one that just stops me in my tracks. I think every square inch of it is just perfect TV that just kills me every time I watch it.
All right, folks, Randy here again, jumping in, and I want to thank Stone Creek Coffee. This episode of the Trap Draw is brought to you by Stone Creek Coffee. Coffee for people who know the difference between a washed process and a washed up licensing deal. There's a whole wave of novelty coffee brands out there, brand built in boardrooms, roasted who knows where, selling you, quote, firefighter blend or, quote, CEO hustle roast or some IP scrape nonsense that feels like it came out of the Buzz Cola factory. If you're listening to a Simpsons deep dive, odds are you've got a functioning brain and a well tuned bullshit detector, which means you deserve coffee that isn't just some Mo Slazak. God, I'm sure I mispronounced that. Come on, Drew, you got to give me some pronunciation guides in this ad read. Anyway, it's not that level of operation, slapping a bad graphic on a bag and calling it craft. Stone Creek's been at this since the monorail hit North Haverbrook. We roast everything ourselves in Milwaukee. We fly to origin countries. We shake hands with farmers. We actually taste and tweak every coffee until it sings like Bleeding Gums Murphy. This isn't your gimmick fueled ecom cash grab with a catchy tagline and no soul. This is coffee made by people who give a damn, who argue about water chemistry, roast curves, and whether or not season 6 is where the Simpsons peaked. So if you're deep diving the golden age, do it with coffee that's got range, not some bag of brown from a brand that thinks single origin means one guy packed the box. Jump over to stonecreekcoffee.com to learn more. There you can learn more about their status as a certified B Corp and shop their entire product line of farm to cup coffees, roasted all along the roast spectrum. You're sure to find a coffee you'll love. Drew is willing to guarantee you'll be stoked on your purchase. If you don't love your coffee, they'll send you another pound to try free of charge until they get you dialed in. StoneCreekCoffee.com. Use code NLU2025 for 15% off your first order. And Nest members, be sure to check your member profile. There's a code in there for you for a little extra ongoing value, and all orders over $50 get free shipping. Stone Creek Coffee, this is the good stuff. Grown with intention, roasted with precision, slurped by weirdos. Drew, I always love your ad copy. Thank you. And now back to our episode.
All right, we are here with Alan Seagull, senior staff writer at The Ringer and the writer of the excellent book that we're going to be discussing today, Stupid TV, Be More Funny, How the Golden Era of The Simpsons Changed TV and America Forever. Alan, great to be with you, man. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for having me.
So many different directions we can go here. I feel like writing a book about The Simpsons is the same as writing a book about like World War II. I don't know how you I don't know how you start. I don't know where you start. I don't know how you focus on kind of what to even dive into. There's just so much there to pull on. So I was thinking we'd start maybe with just like tone and direction. I mean, the book does a great job of digging into specifically like the cultural impact of The Simpsons and the way that its legacy has lasted and what was going on at the time. What was your thought process or your decision process between going after it like that or going after it as just like a straight biography? Here's how Mo Sizlak was created type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, The Simpsons is such a broad, like rich text. It's 36, 37 years in that trying to summarize that in one book, I think would have been impossible. And my idea, like I'd always wanted to write a Simpsons book, but I couldn't quite think of the angle. And a couple years ago, I'm a 90s kid, I'm 42. I realized like, why am I trying to be completist, right? Like why would I bother with that? The heart of the show is the first 8 to 10 seasons, and it really just provides this tidy narrative. Like 89 it premieres and it's the 90s, and then the golden era is over. And so that is really what I wanted to focus on. It's what everybody who quotes the show focuses on, basically, and that's us. That's everybody.
On that note, there's a line in the book that I thought very, very succinctly sums up kind of really just the whole show, and it's basically like I'm paraphrasing maybe or might get it slightly wrong, but essentially like The Simpsons was a phenomenon and then it became an institution. And I'm wondering if you could unpack a little bit of what that means, because I thought that was so well said, and I never really thought about it that way.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, it was both like explosively popular. For example, I think the first year of the show alone, they sold 15 million T-shirts, Simpsons T-shirts, most of them Bart shirts. And also, it was kind of subversive and dangerous to the general public. Like parents banned the show. The president of the United States criticized it from the campaign stump. And as sort of it went along into the early 90s, like a lot of adults who were scared of it, who banned their children from watching it, started to realize that it was a lot more wholesome than it was ever given credit for. So that is what sort of put it on the path to institution, right? So it became this beloved thing that, you know, there aren't too many things in pop culture that have like 100% approval rating. Like a Simpsons writer who I interviewed for the book said it's like the Beatles and the Simpsons. And it's kind of true. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
Totally true, and that word institution too. I never really. I mean, it makes so much sense when you think about it, but the difference between those two ideas, a phenomenon, just the white hot craze, versus like, no, yeah, now it's more kind of like the post office or something that it just exists. I don't know how. Yeah, I don't really know how it came to be, but yeah, I can't picture life without it. You know, it exists, and maybe it's going to exist forever. You know,
it's like in the air, right? Like it's, you know, we breathe it and speak it, and we quote it when we don't even know we're quoting it. So that's sort of the impact.
On that note, there's an air show that I'm in Milwaukee and they're practicing for the air show today. So A, apologies if you hear any planes flying over, but B, it's like I don't even realize I'm doing it, but it's just immediate air show, you know, country fried rubes, rock you like a hurricane. I mean, there's just all these things that like, God, I haven't watched a new episode of this show in 15 years. And it's just, you realize, especially reading the book, it's like, oh my God, it's just hard coded into my DNA. It's just everything about this show. It permeates everything about my sense of humor, the way I see the world, the movies I like, the TV shows I don't like, the celebrities I like. It's just everything.
The way I describe it is like it's everybody's sort of a cool older brother. Like if you didn't have an older brother, I was the oldest of three boys. So
me too.
Like that's how I was introduced to things, is by The Simpsons, right? So it was movies, TV, music, politics, stuff I didn't understand. I like learned from The Simpsons, and you know, through a little more research or talking to adults, like I figured out stuff on my own after that.
Totally. And sorry, Jordan, I'm talking way too much here, but
No, no.
there's a quote in there from Conan O'Brien where he's talking about like some of the funniest Homer stuff is where he of course is like so dumb he might forget to like die from forgetting to breathe, but at the same time he's just got these unbelievably esoteric evolved references, and that's like that kind of feels like me watching the show as a kid too, of just like I had never seen Cape Fear before when I'm a 10-year-old kid, but like by the time I get to be 25 and see it, or by the time I read Lord of the Flies later in high, I'm like, oh, right, it's from The Simpsons. Okay, now I got it. And it's just it's kind of warped my perspective on so many pop culture things.
A great one of those is like when Lisa is sort of upset. She's afraid she's not going to be able to go to an Ivy League school, and that
Oh, the
she
best.
might have to go to Vassar instead of an Ivy League school. And Homer's like, there'll be no Vassar bashing in this family, and it's like, yeah,
Just about enough of your Vassar
it's
bash.
like he doesn't, he sometimes forgets to breathe it, but yet he knows what Vassar is.
I think some of what I loved, especially that older brother analogy, for me, it was like my cool neighbor who was into everything before me, since was the oldest, like you guys had said. I think what really resonated with that analogy for me is like I was bought in already, right? I didn't know Cape Fear. I didn't know Citizen Kane. I didn't know all these things as a kid. And yet, like, I felt bought in and I felt like The Simpsons explained just enough for me to be there. And it's interesting because when I watched The Simpsons as a kid, I felt like this like level of pretension because I was in an era where like Family Guy was already out, Futurama was already out, King of the Hill was already out, and so I was like that one kid that was watching The Simpsons while everybody else was watching Family Guy, and I like really held on to that for some reason. It was very much like a I'm not like other girls. I'm watching The Simpsons type thing, which is terribly cringe looking back now. But I don't know. For some reason, even in all of its like cynicism and wholesomeness and everything, The Simpsons really spoke to me in a way that I never really understood until I read your book, Alan.
Thanks. I mean, the thing about the show is like it's not replicable. Like even the best animated shows after it were just different, right? Like so like Family Guy and South Park and King of the Hill, like they survived and were good because they were not trying to be like The Simpsons. And anyone that tried to copy it directly was not going to do it.
Can you so of course would recommend everybody pick this book up, read it in its entirety because there's so much good stuff in it. It takes a long time to unpack a lot of the things I'm about to ask you to cram together and make very succinct. But can you just spell out or expound a little bit on what it all had going for it? Like what are all these like kind of magic boxes that got checked at the same time?
Sure. So the first thing is it was a Fox project, and at the time, Fox was like it's crazy to think about now. Like the line in the industry was that it was the coat hanger network, which meant you needed a coat hanger on your antenna to get it. Like nobody could. It was like a backwater, right? So you had that. You had a network that was absolutely desperate to get anything good, right? So they hired James L. Brooks, who is a film director and a Hollywood producer who did Mary Tyler Moore and broadcast news in Terms of Endearment. So he was like red hot in the 80s. Fox was like, please make something for us, make something for us. So with him on board, and then, you know, he sort of was great at spotting talent, and him and his sort of producing partner found Matt Groening, who was an underground cartoonist who was very popular at the time, but like his cartoons were in alt weeklies. So you had that, and then you had the third sort of leg of the triumvirate, which was Sam Simon, who was a very, very talented young TV producer, who was a complete wise ass, who was jaded about TV, and basically was like, "Fuck this industry. Like, we're just going to try to make something cool. They may cancel us after 13 episodes, but every episode's going to be different. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be like anything, unlike anything on TV before and currently, which was what animation gave it. And you have all those things together, and then add in the writers who are all sort of Harvard guys and very smart guys, and that's the magic sauce.
Yeah, how much of it do you think was the Fox aspect of, you know, it just seems like so much creative freedom to be able to push it and almost like a nothing to lose sort of thing as well. Like that feels like all of those elements are wildly important, right? But that one almost is like if you don't have that, you can't. really
Yeah,
hit the gas, right?
so James L. Brooks basically he negotiated sort of a no notes rule, and for that really basically means that like creative executive for Fox could not weigh in with sort of suggestions or changes, and that became legendary within the industry because at the time sitcoms were churned out. They made 22 to 25 episodes a year, and so it was like formulaic, and the executives wanted very specific things. So to have like a show that could just have carte blanche was very rare, and it was sort of misunderstood because it wasn't always that the notes were bad. It was that the writers didn't have to worry about doing the notes, so they had more time to make things funny, which is sounds simple, but a lot of writers at the time, different shows, didn't have that.
You spoke a lot about like the challenge of the cultural acceptance of The Simpsons. I mean, it kind of has to follow up to shows like not follow up in a literal sense of thematically, but Full House and The Cosby Show. It's rivaling The Cosby Show effectively, and even though it's completely different. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective. I mean, you talk about this a little bit in the book, but how The Simpsons really destigmatized watching cartoons for adults and like that phenomenon, because I mean that's a pretty high mountain to climb, especially in that time period.
Yeah, I mean, you talk to the writers now, the Simpsons writers back then, and you talk to them now, and they like laugh because cartoons were for hacks. Like they weren't supposed to be for adults. It was cartoons like My Little Pony and He-Man and G.I. Joe. They were to sell breakfast cereal and toys. Like that's what cartoons were. So there were these talented Simpsons writers who were being told by people that they trusted to be like, do not work on the show. It will ruin your career. And The Simpsons basically alone completely legitimized the industry. And like it's skipping ahead, like any adult animation now would not exist without The Simpsons.
I never really put two and two together. Again, it's kind of obvious thinking back on it now, but the piece that was in your book too about like that format and cartoons specifically also just being a thing that brings like the kids who really like Bart Simpson and like when he gives catchphrases, and the parents who are like, I'm laughing at Sideshow Bob's references to Fellini or whatever, is like that is also such a secret sauce that like would be so hard to try to replicate.
Yeah, and I mean the sort of open secret about the show is like everybody says, "Oh, it was written for adults. It was written for adults. It was written for adults." But it was so sort of brilliantly simple visually and had enough elements. Like the early episodes were all about Bart, and like kids loved Bart. Like it one of the Simpsons writers basically said it was the equivalent of like Tina Fey playing Sarah Palin in 2008. It was like, I love the look, I love what she says, I love everything she does. So Bart hooked kids, and then that allowed it to like the show grew with them, right? So it got more complex, and yes, it wasn't quite the explosive phenomenon it was in 1990, but it got better and better and sort of built this incredibly large fan base, like from kids to adults.
It also had, like Jordan referenced it earlier, but so many parents kind of stigmatizing it or trying to run in the opposite direction. I just think about my own household, which sounds like it was kind of similar to yours, as much as you kind of tipped your hand in the early part of the book, where my mom was so vociferously against The Simpsons. Absolutely not. This is a disrespectful show. You can't watch it. And my dad, they did not ever do this as parents, but my dad would, like, if my mom was out of the house, would be a little bit like, I mean, we can watch one, we can watch one, and it just is that kind of like just a culmination of a lot of the different things in the book, but
Yeah,
bringing together parents and kids and kind of the like almost misunderstanding of it.
yeah, Jordan, I'm curious. Like a thing I've noticed is like when I started working on the book, DJ and I would have like our age group would have these stories about like my parents banned it at the beginning because of like Homer with the belly dancer, and they eventually gave in. They were like, this is too popular, or rather, like, I don't know, they just relented. They were not that stringent about it. They basically were just like, it's maybe a little inappropriate, but they eventually relented. But the point is that I think starting maybe in the 2000s, like for us it was banned, but for a lot of like people a little bit younger than us, it was the Simpsons was the only show that their parents let them watch because to them it was something intellectual, right? And that like that's what people forget about the very beginning. It was very threatening to a lot of adults. Then it became like the Peabody Award winning Simpsons. And yeah.
Yeah, a lot of my consumption as a kid was very heavily monitored by my parents, and I don't fault them for it whatsoever. But The Simpsons was something they introduced me to. So, and yeah, right, because at that point it seemed fairly tame in comparison to a lot of the other things that were kind of going on TV and in larger media. So to them, it was like, yeah, we watched The Simpsons in the '90s. Yeah, that's fine. You can do that.
I have a friend who I talked to for the book. I'm not sure he got in the book, but he's a like a Hollywood guy, written TV and movies, and he basically said his son, I think, started with South Park, which again is
Oh
like
wow.
way more crass. Like,
Yeah.
and South Park's funny. I'm not sort of denying that, but he went from South Park to The Simpsons, and like it broke his brain. It didn't seem edgy enough for him, The Simpsons, like after South Park. So it's been an interesting like progression in that way.
That's well said. It's kind of, yeah, I've never really thought about that, like backwards progression of it's almost like a technology thing, right? Like the backwards compatibility of going from something that the Simpsons like evolved to actually the source material. It is a very weird. That would be a jarring experience for sure.
Yes.
I want to go back a little bit to kind of the no notes policy and the writers like getting very focused on making it as funny as possible, because as you're describing that, and as you're describing in the book, it almost reminded me of like the unlimited vacation policy, where it's like, you take as much vacation as you want, and then nobody actually takes vacation, because the writers room sounded both like the most fun utopian place in the history of the world and just a complete and utter hellscape that absolutely broke some of the greatest minds in TV history. I wonder if you agree, disagree, or have anything to add there.
Yeah, I mean, Conan O'Brien, I think, put it best, where he said like people sort of ask him about these creative breakthroughs that he would have over the years, and like, take me back to this magic moment where you wrote the monorail episode, and he'd be like, these creative moments were just like a lot of fried food, a lot of weekends at the lot, driving in his Ford Taurus, like writing all this stuff down longhand, and just repeating and repeating and repeating, and like being in the Simpsons writers room, which was like a dorm with stuff hanging off the ceiling. People called it a frat house, but like that sort of undermines the nerdiness of it. But you hear the writers talking about it now, and they idealize it, because the work that came out of it was incredible. But there were times when they would like sit there for 5 hours thinking of a punchline, and like it didn't. I don't know. It's funnier in hindsight than it was in the moment. I'll put it that way, or more fun.
And it's kind of it's again, there's all these little tidbits for somebody who's seen every episode, at least the first 15, 20 seasons, like seen every episode a million times. There's little tidbits throughout the whole book about all these great classic episodes, and one of them was the title, the Homer Badman title, that is just like it's basically the original cancel culture episode about Homer, and it was really funny to hear. I forget who actually wrote that one. It's Greg Daniels.
Greg Daniels,
Yeah.
yes, who is an amazing TV writer and producer.
But it was almost like an in-joke of like, man, these writers are just sitting there for hours and hours trying to come up with the most clever title ever. And what if I just called this one Homer Badman? and it ended up sticking. There's just so much fun stuff like that.
It's just like the sometimes they would all try to be like, the culture of the show was that like the best joke would win the day all the time. So they would try to top each other, and not even for credit all the time, just to like get the funniest joke. And then sometimes it would cause them to overthink. And like Homer Badman was just like, all right, like we're just going to be as simple as possible. Like there's nothing, like it's funnier that way. And it worked.
I found it so fascinating that the culture of the writers' room effectively was people trying so hard to prop up Bart, but it was really just a room full of Lisas. Like that spoke to me on a level that felt so reassuring, because I've always felt like I was Lisa, and there are times in my life where I was so ashamed of it, but I was like, oh no, this is being written for me. Like I get this.
There was definitely an aspect of like aspirational mischief with Bart. Like Bart would sometimes be very clever in a way that maybe like was a little bit breaking character, but like the writers, I think at the beginning were responding to the audience being just incredibly into Bart, and then they realized like it was limiting, right? So Bart, for all his hilariousness, like is more not one dimensional. He just is less like rich, I think, for story than like Homer or Lisa, because they, like Homer's an adult. It's that simple. And also Lisa is like the moral center of the show. She's always butting up against like the BS of Springfield, whereas Bart like is too unintelligent probably to deal with that.
What's really interesting, like as you're saying, like the Homer's an adult thing, it just reminded me of kind of like when he goes to space and when they really start like pushing, like, oh, this guy's an adult, we can do whatever we want with him. There's so much more to do with Homer than there is with Bart, who's a little kid. He can only do so much stuff. Uh, and what really struck me from the book, I'm maybe 4 or 5 years younger than you, Alan, and so it's like those first two, three, 4 seasons, like I've seen them all, but they didn't really hit me as hard as 5 through 12, something like that. And 5 through 12, again, like crystallized reading the book is where you really start to get the writers like pushing it, where you start to get the really zany, almost just like I was going to say cartoonish, but like even more cartoonish type of stuff. And I didn't realize that there was any pushback to that, and that kind of spawns a whole other line of questioning, probably about internet comments and message boards and all that. But what was your experience? Were you aware of kind of that tonal shift as you were watching it, or were you just kind of along for the ride? And how do you view kind of those two groups of episodes?
I didn't get it until I was in my teens, maybe, or maybe even a little bit older than that. Like I love the show so much that the direction it was going, I didn't care as much as I did when I, was a little bit older. I mean, what's fascinating about that is you mentioned the internet. Like there were people on the internet saying The Simpsons was going in the toilet in like 1992, which is absolutely absurd. It's like this is the best season of TV in the history of the medium. And so, yes, there is that element of like nothing can please everybody. But at the same time, like, yeah, like you have this character in Homer that you can make a vessel for anger and stupidity and like ignorance and all these things, and it's really hard not to lean into that. And also there are only so many intimate family stories you can tell. Like it has to get more broad, more experimental. And yeah, I think over time it got a little bit too much like that, and I think they've pulled back in a good way in recent years. But yeah, it was hard to keep up the greatness.
Howdy, folks. Randy here. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode, Rhoback. Rhoback Activewear. It's officially peak polo season, and nobody does polos better than Rhoback. Best fit, best feel, hands down. You've heard us say it before, but it really holds up, especially in this heat. Whether you're into bold prints, clean stripes, or go-to solids, Rhoback's summer lineup is dialed, lightweight, breathable, and the collar, it holds shape like no other, no matter how hot or humid it gets. It's actually incredible. Also, Rhoback's short game is sneaky strong. The Delta Looper shorts have a stretch waistband that's built to move, but still keeps your polo tucked. Or go with the everyday shorts, more relaxed, elastic waistband, made to be worn untucked, but still look sharp. So if your summer fit needs a refresh, now's the time. Head to rhoback.com. Rhoback spelled RHOBACK.com. Use code TRAP, TRAP, for 20% off your first order through the end of the week. Polos, hoodies, shorts, whatever you need, Rhoback's got you covered. Now back to the episode.
Well, speaking of recent years, I mean, maybe a chance to jump in now. What's your relationship to the show now? Do you feel like you said completist earlier. Do you feel like someone who has? I always think about this with like SNL, where I'm like, is it great? Like, not really, but I feel like I gotta watch. I mean, I feel like this weird almost obligation. I gotta watch it. It's part of being an American a little bit.
Yeah, it's
And,
like keeping up with the culture or
yeah,
cultural conversation. I mean, I don't watch regularly anymore. I mean, I probably watched for 20 seasons just nonstop, and I think the show, maybe this is a cop out, but I really think it's a victim of its own success. It was so good for so long
or yeah,
that the stuff now just like it's gonna feel like it pales in comparison. And I think that there are good episodes. It's like I've made this comparison before, but it's like Michael Jordan on the Wizards, right? Like he's kind of underwhelming sometimes, but then sometimes he can like run the length of the floor, block somebody from behind and like come back with like a thunderous dunk. Like there is room for greatness for sure. It's just a little bit more few and far between.
I'm curious about achieving that greatness in particular to the golden age. There was a pretty evident lack of diversity in the writers' room, yet they somehow managed to be extremely niche and ahead of their time all the time. I mean, how do you think they achieved such a thing?
I don't want to say luck because that's insane, but yeah, like so again, the writers' room at the time was heavily male, all male, for the first 5 seasons, and they talk about how there are blind spots. They're like one of the writers basically was like, yeah, like if you look at like the characters, it's like Bart has 3 friends and Homer has friends and Marge has no friends. Lisa has like a couple. Like there is like some stuff that needed to be reckoned with, like Hank Azaria, who's a white guy, voicing Apu, who's Indian. So, like, I think the writers, it should be said, like, don't they haven't backed away from this charge against them. But to answer your question a little more succinctly, is like they were smart and hilarious and worldly enough that they could sort of overcome their uniformity to make something hilarious, which is really rare because TV at the time like was white as hell. It was exactly what you think it was.
Going into some of the writers, what was the vibe around this book? How much of your reporting was specifically for this book? How much was just over the last however many years as a kind of culture writer? And what's the vibe with a lot of these people as far as talking about the good old days? Is it like a something they're really pumped to do? Is it something where they're like, man, I don't really want to play the hits? What's the well, I'm sure it changes from person to person, but I'm curious for a little bit of overview there.
Yeah, I think overall they were really happy to talk. I think they like when the show was really at its peak, the writers were not getting a lot of fame, right? So it was like Matt Groening, who's the creator of the show, James L. Brooks, who is the executive producer, Sam Simon a little bit, and even he kind of resented not getting enough press. But I think these writers who have since been mythologized by people like me and like us, like they're legends, like among comedy writers, like they're proud of this like thing that they were a part of. And so the vast majority of the people I talked to really wanted to talk. And all the feedback I've gotten so far, not to toot my own horn, has been really positive, and it's like very validating because I was sort of terrified that like I wanted to be honest about the show, but really get into the joy of it, which is like the sense of humor. And I think a lot of the writing about the show doesn't quite get there. Like that to me is the most important part of the story is like what made it good, what made it funny, and like why are we still talking about it?
Well, I think that's what's really hard about the task that you took on is like I was saying at the beginning, it's not a biography or like a history. It is a lot of synthesis and a lot of what, connecting dots and connecting interviews, and that's yeah, it's very hard to do. So again, congrats on
Thanks.
painting a fun picture to look at and to read.
Yeah, and just to sort of hammer a point that I made earlier, like I wanted I wanted to be as definitive as possible without trying to be completist because I think like then it sort of becomes like a mile wide and an inch deep, and so I would hear these stories and drill down on things that were I thought were funny and interesting without worrying about like, oh shit, I didn't talk about this episode, or this episode.
As someone who did not experience The Simpsons in real time, the Sam Simon and Matt Groening rivalry, like, had no idea that existed or was there was ever that tension. I loved the quote in the book from Sam Simon where he talks about Groening's fame and his recognition and says, "It bothers me a little bit, but I knew going in that Matt, the underground cartoonist who gets a series, was a compelling story. He did create the characters." And then Groening says, "Well, that was condescending." I mean, I was digging into that. Do you feel like, you uncovered more about that rivalry? Was it hush hush? I mean, I know it played out a little bit in the media, but I'm curious about your findings kind of years after that.
Yeah, it was pretty open. They really didn't like each other. And I think like both probably had points. Like Simon was sort of a typical comedian or comedic type that like everything was a fight. He loved sort of picking at scabs and like being kind of dickish to be for lack of a better word. And Graining was just an underdog, right? He was like an like you said in that quote, like he had alt weekly comic strip. And the thing with Groening that, like, I mean this as a compliment, that should not be understated, was how shrewd he was. Like, he didn't want to sign the rights over to his comic strip to Fox, which was Life in Hell, which is really popular. So he's like, all right, I'll make you characters that you can use. So again, he could keep his profits from the comic strip. And I think, like, that maybe was lost in these sort of one-dimensional profiles of him. And I'm not blaming, like, journalists, because again, the interesting thing is not his licensing deals. It's that he made this incredible TV show that was popular. And, a couple years before, he was living paycheck to paycheck.
I think another character that obviously jumped off the page, and the guy I was probably most excited to learn about was John Swartzwelder, who, I guess maybe I would just ask you to sum it up. Who is he? What's the legend, and why is he so famous in Simpsons lore?
So John Swartzwelder, I'll give you, like, the back of the baseball card. Basically, he wrote the most Simpsons episodes. I think he wrote 59 Simpsons episodes, which is incredibly rare. Most of them were in the 90s. Those episodes were heavily rewritten. Most episodes were. His first drafts were, like, impeccable compared to everybody else. Like, his stuff did not need as much rewriting. And as a character, he, like, looked like David Crosby. To sum him up, there was a rumor that Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec was based on him. It was not true. It was not even close to being true, but that's the kind of, like, cachet he came with. Like, he, like, lives in a ranch in the San Fernando Valley. You hear stories about him, and it's like tall tales. Like, he plays baseball and can, like, hit home runs out of, like, Major League Baseball parks. He like drove a Datsun, which was like I don't know if this may date me. It's like the car before a Nissan, and he chain smoked. And at some point he was like, I'm done with the writer's room. And he built a diner booth in his house to write from. And, like, that's him, just this, like, and he was not a Harvard guy. He was like an ad man in the 70s. So and one more fun story was, like, he had an exercise regimen that a doctor told him about, where he said, like, the best way to be healthy is to run really fast and then stop, and then run really fast again and stop. And, like, that was the kind of, like, weird, quirky, like, almost quack stuff that he was doing.
I loved. I think it was the Itchy and Scratchy and Marge episode, where there was kind of a little bit of push and pull on why would we do this episode about censorship and yada yada yada. And I think there was an anecdote in there, right, about him kind of taking the reins and
Yeah.
why.
So basically, no one wanted to write that episode, which was about, like, Itchy and Scratchy, the show within the show, like, being canceled. Like, Marge goes on a crusade against it, and none of the writers wanted to do it. It just, like, seemed preachy or too political. And Swartzwelder was like, had, like, a wry smile. Was like, I'm going to do this. And one of the other writers was like, why would you want to do this? And he basically explained that to make an episode about cartoon violence, you would have to create the most violent shit you could ever imagine for TV to show how violent it was. So if you watch that episode now, it is incredibly violent. Like the most violent thing you've ever seen on TV. Of course, it's the satire, but Swartzwelder just, like, loved pushing the envelope in that way.
And I think some of his, just for people who are listening who are not familiar, I mean, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge was one of his. Bart the Murderer, Homer at the Bat, which I have 600 or 700 questions about. Bart's Comet, Radioactive Man, Homie the Clown, Bart Carney, the Cartridge Family, of course, Homer's Enemy, the Frank Grimes episode, which, again, I watched again last night, and just is like, I didn't realize how different it is from a lot of episodes, I think, until I read the book, and until you kind of put a little bit of a finer point on his style and his tone and his nihilism and all of these things. And there is absolutely no heart in that episode. There is no redeeming quality whatsoever in that episode. And it's the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen.
I mean, it might be
in my life. I think it's the bleakest ever. Yeah.
Like George Meyer, another, maybe 1 and 1A Simpsons writers, Swartzwelder and George Meyer. He said, like, a Swartzwelder joke is like something terribly banal, like, juxtaposed with something, like, horrifying. And my favorite Swartzwelder joke is from, the Hank Scorpio episode, where, you don't only move twice, where they move to the Pacific Northwest, the Simpsons. Homer takes a tech job for one episode. and there's a montage, a like informational film about this town in the Pacific Northwest that's like Palo Alto or whatever, Redmond, Washington, however you want to say. And it's this like gentrification montage. And so it's like these boarded up buildings like turn into coffee shops. And it's like all these things transforming. And then they show a homeless man and he turns into a mailbox. And it's like the most on the nose, like how prescient that is. Like I remember writing about that episode in like, 2016, like before sort of Elon became, a cartoon character. And even though maybe he was headed that way, like that stuff, like I think at the time it was like Palo Alto's housing commissioner couldn't afford to live there. So she had to move. And it's like, that's the kind of thing the show got right.
I don't know if it's a Swartzwelder joke or not, but this very, very similar one. I can't remember what episode it's from, but they're driving. Oh, I think it's Mr. Burns' son. The Rodney Dangerfield episode where they're driving down the road. And he's got like he's holding the sign, like trying to hitchhike, and Homer just can't get a pull for that sign. It's like one of my, just like another one of my favorite jokes ever. But Jordan, where do you want to go? What else is on your list?
While we're talking about Swartzwelder, I was really interested in this like little pantheon of writers with George Meyer, John Vitti. They all eventually form a Simpsons pessimist club, which I wonder is a byproduct of the Principal and the Pauper, and B, just a byproduct of just the crunch culture and just the general burnout that was writing for The Simpsons at that time.
I think it was the crunch culture because that was like early 90s, like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 seasons in. I couldn't quite get the date right, but they were so obsessed with making breaking through creatively, like making new kinds of episodes that they like were driving each other crazy. They're like, nah, this season's not as good as the last one. And that's how like committed they were to sort of changing the game in TV. And like that was all Sam Simon like in their ears about, every episode should be different than the last. And like that can be a hell of a lot of pressure, as you said, to live up to.
We mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the kind of the internet culture of it, the worst episode ever ification of just pop culture, I guess. Do you tie a lot of that back to The Simpsons? Is that at its genesis? Is that like, again, there's all these kind of things nexusing at the right time, and it kind of feels like the internet and The Simpsons are two of those things as well.
The rise was very parallel, even though like a lot of people didn't realize it. I mean, so in the early 90s, like think about who Simpsons writers are. They're nerds, right? And so am I. But they're eggheads, right? They're into new technology. So a couple of the writers in the early 90s got like dial-up internet through UCLA. Like this was before AOL and the World Wide Web. So it was hard to, or maybe I'm wrong about AOL, but the point is that like internet access at home was not widespread. So these writers would go on early message boards like alt.tv.simpsons, which was a very like cool site where people talked about the show. And the Simpsons writers would like post episode information like in these message boards, which is like very cool, I think, for the fans to like interact with the writers. But like everything with the internet, like anger started bubbling up. People started getting pissed. They were mad at the writers. And they would like call the offices and get mad. And at some point, the Simpsons writers just like had to rip the internet out of the wall. Like it was an early sort of laboratory experiment about like the interaction of fandom and show creators. Because like even at this time when the show is amazing, fans start feeling ownership of the thing that they love, right? And with the internet, that like kind of pushes the two forces together. So you have like the creators and the fans, and in the 80s, 70s, 60s, like they couldn't approach the writers of All in the Family. They had to write letters, and those could just go unanswered. And The Simpsons really it forced those two things together and really kind of was a sign of where things were going.
Definitely, and that's what that's what really struck me was writing a show. I can't imagine if you just take it for granted now. Like there's comments under every video and every podcast and all of these things for better or worse. And this idea that making All in the Family, like you said, I mean, there's unless a TV critic's writing about it, it's like you have the ratings and you have nothing else to go on, and that's just I mean, probably, I don't know, like puts your mind at ease in a way. Looking back on it now, I can't imagine, what it was like. I feel like a lot of our brains are kind of now wired a little bit as that's a normal thing, even though it's clearly not. Uh, but to like be in that changeover period had to be just such a mind fuck to try to figure out.
Yeah, and I think like an underrated part of like what made the show great was that in the writers' room, it kind of was like a hermetically sealed bubble. Like these guys who had incredible wealth of knowledge, like they knew movies, TV, books, games, anything, and they would just try to like. It's a cliche, but it's like they wanted to make each other laugh, and I mean, they wanted to make the audience laugh, but they didn't really care like what people thought about the direction of Homer. Like they were just going to do their own thing. And the quote that I love that one of the writers gave me, which I mean I think sort of sums up the Simpsons success, is like the first rule of TV is to give people what they want. But if you give people something that they don't know that they want, they will stick with you forever. And that was the Simpsons.
So another big beat that's in there, and again, you kind of write about this with the George Bush stuff is the most obvious answer, and him kind of taking a stand, and the Waltons versus the Simpsons, and a lot of that stuff. I think that all kind of distills or boils down to just how much politics has changed over the last 30 years. And I'm wondering if you could kind of, for the audience that hasn't read the book yet, explain a little bit of, I guess, just the Simpsons' point of view on politics and who they're taking shots at versus maybe what that would look like today, and just how some of that has evolved and why that was important to the show in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally the show leans left. I mean, it's very obvious. It's a liberal leaning show. Or I mean, yeah, progressive is probably the best way to put it. But they also really hated, like, the whole point of the show was to sort of make fun of corruption, right? And how things in American society don't work. And so, the biggest target politically is Mayor Quimby, who is basically a Kennedy, who is a Democrat. So their whole thing was like, yes, they were progressive, but they also didn't like that things didn't work in society. And, there's an argument to be made that the show, I think Jordan, you were saying this, like, so nihilistic, right? It kind of feels sometimes that it's like hopeless. But I mean, if anything, I think that at its best, its worldview was like, at least George Meyer sort of put it this way, was like that life is like punishing and miserable and frustrating, but also it's worth living. And I think that really was the politics of the show, that like, even when things were really bad, it wasn't worth giving up.
I want to ask you, you put together a list for theringer.com. This looks like it was quite a few years ago of your 100, was it your 100 favorite Simpsons episodes? Is it your 100 best? How did you phrase it? Because I'm sure that's
I think it was the 100 best, and this was 2017, I think.
This had to be extremely daunting. I would almost wonder if it was more daunting than writing the book itself.
I remember talking to a writer about it and saying, like, you could take the first 200 to 250 episodes and put them in like a random generator and just jumble it up like, like roulette or bingo, and pull episodes out, and like you probably wouldn't be that far off in terms of the ranking.
That's a good point. And even, especially like once you get, anything north of that top 10, I think you can make a case for anything. Like you said, where you get to the top 10 is, I think, where people start to feel,
yes,
that's where people tense up a little bit.
Yeah. The best, I mean, you guys know that how it works. Like people like get pissed off on Twitter and be like, oh, how come this episode wasn't on? And then you'd be like, this episode was on the list. Like, you just need to read a little farther down. And the thing about it is it changes. Like, my top 10 now might be a little bit different than it was back then.
Well, I do want to ask you about your top 10. But,
yeah, how quickly after making this list did you go back and go, oh, no, maybe I should have slotted number 5 over number 6?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, I think my top episode was Last Exit to Springfield, which, Homer becomes the union president at the power plant, and there's some incredible jokes. It's the
people might know that one is Dental Plan Lisa
Needs Braces, and it's the episode where, like, Lisa goes in like the laughing gas trip, and the dentist shows her the big book of British smiles, and it's a very heartwarming episode. It's like Homer sort of fighting for his daughter, even if he's doing it sort of in a dumb way. And I think it's a great episode. It's probably in the top 5, but right now I think Mr. Plow is my top episode, just because it's like it kind of reminds me that something the writers said was like they were constantly trying to do episodes that you could not do on live action TV. And Mr. Plow is like insane if you think about it. It's like
Mhm.
two friends are rival plow drivers, and they, go on the mountains, and Homer talks to God at one point, and Linda Ronstadt is a guest star. It's like something that should not work and does. And there are references, like there's a reference to a movie called Sorcerer from 1977 that no one in 1992 would have any clue what that is. Like it was not available on video. It was a movie that got buried by Star Wars, and yet there's like a picture perfect scene, shot by shot parody of it in the episode.
That's another example of like I should have no knowledge of what that movie is, but because of things like this, it gets into the brain worms of the right people and becomes this film bro like absolute, just one of the commandments that everybody has to see. But it's just great.
I didn't see that movie until I was 39, and so I didn't get the reference until I was 39, and I was
Yeah, similar.
watching the episode, writing the book, and I was like, "Oh my god, how did I not see this before?"
What was
Well,
your favorite piece of media that The Simpsons put on the map?
Put on the map? That's a really good question. I know, like, maybe I'm stalling with my answer here, but like Homer references China, like it's Chinatown Marge, and I didn't know what Chinatown was. I remember asking my parents what that was. I mean, they were obsessed with Hitchcock, with Kubrick. Like, I didn't get that the space episode was like 2001 Space Odyssey. Like, it again, it referenced so much that, yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to think of like things that the writers were obsessed with. Like,
I always go back to musical theater, right? Where it's like there's so many examples of like, and this is maybe a good example of like how it just warps your perception of these things that you've never seen. Is like, when they're singing Guys and Dolls, and they're just a bunch of crazy guys and dolls. Like, yeah, oh, it turns out that song's not in Guys and Dolls. And it's like, I didn't realize that until I was.
Yeah, I mean the monorail song is it's the Music Man. Like Conan O'Brien loved the Music Man, and I think like it was so they were so reverent of like classic Americana, right? That a lot of shows like just probably found to be old, and like old farts love that stuff. But the Simpsons writers, they loved, they would reference The Fugitive and Basic Instinct, and also, old timey radio plays from the 30s, like Preston Sturgis and stuff. Yeah.
I always go back to the Planet of the Apes mixed with like the show tunes and the Dr. Zaius, and I mean all of that stuff is just, God, it's so good. Going back to your top 10 list here, I want to run through these just because these are the heavy hitters. Feel free to monologue as long or as short as on any of these as you like, but this was the list as of 2017. Number 10, Stark Raving Dad, the Michael Jackson episode. A lot of good stuff in the book about this one as well.
Yeah, so Michael Jackson, again, it seems very sinister now.
Turns out you can't watch that one on Disney Plus. I was trying to watch that last night.
Love children's entertainment, love the show, wanted to be on the show. Also had weird contractual things with Sony at the time, so allegedly he's not the one singing in the episode where he plays a 300-pound mental patient, and like it's like a Michael Jackson impersonator singing the songs, which is very bizarre. And again, like you said, that episode got pulled on Disney Plus, which I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, right? Like I don't know if the people forget about the episode. That's the thing. And again, I know it's weird to sort of talk about Michael Jackson like this, but he was a guest star that sort of did legitimize the idea of being a guest star in The Simpsons. It was him and Dustin Hoffman really like made it safe for celebrities to go on the show.
Number 9, Bart sells his soul. I was thinking about this episode when you were saying earlier about, Bart's a little kid and he's doing all these catchphrases, he's being mean to the teachers. And in a way, it's almost like I think of this episode as the best example of like, man, when you do hit him with the off-speed pitch on Bart, like it hits you hard. And I think this episode's a great example of that.
Yeah, it's like Lisa asks him about like the works of Pablo Neruda, and Bart, I forget exactly what he says, but basically like acknowledges that he knows who it is. I mean, that's the thing that was so good with the show, is like it had all these rules about sort of being grounded, and then like something would come out of nowhere that like made no sense, yet it was still hilarious.
Number 8, Homer at the Bat, among the most famous episodes ever. This is, of course, the Wade Boggs, Ken Griffey Jr., Mike Scioscia, Steve Sachs, Terrell Strawberry, famously, all sign up to come play for the company softball team. This is a Schwartzwelder episode. I'm just curious, kind of what sticks out as your favorite parts of this episode, or any fun anecdotes you have?
I mean, the line that I like is when Darryl Strawberry is like coming to replace Homer, I think in right field, and Homer's like, he's like, "Are you better than me?" And Darryl Strawberry's like, "I've met you before,
Well,
but
never met
yes, but yeah." I think what's crazy about that episode was like, it was an extravaganza at the time. It was the first episode that beat the Cosbys in the ratings, like straight out. But it also is like a really sad relic in a way. Like imagine today, like 9 Major League Baseball stars appearing on The Simpsons. Like, would it be remotely as big or popular? Like, could you name, like, who would the 9 be? Like Mookie Betts 3 times, and
Aaron Judge, yeah,
Aaron Judge,
yeah,
and
no, you're
like
so
I don't know,
right.
like Juan Soto, like it's just a sign of like how different American culture is now, and like it kind of plays into the episode, which is like all about, you know, old timey players, like, you know, or Smith is just like, your right fielder's been dead for 130 years, and
Mordecai Three-Finger Brown.
yeah, and it's like, I forget the guy's name. It's like Creighton or something. I'm probably not getting it right, but again, that was a great Schwartzwelder episode because it had elements of just like a bygone era.
Number 7, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. We talked about that one, and kind of the censorship and the cartoon violence one. Number 6, Radio Bart. That's obviously all these are great. That's a good one as well. Another Bart episode.
It's another ridiculous premise that works, and there's like the "We Are the World" parody. Like Bart falls down falls down the well, and it's like, you know, and that sort of brings back like this Baby Jessica story from the 80s. Like it's a play on that. And again, like it's a perfect example of like how a weird guest star, like Sting is the guest star. And like, it doesn't, like he plays it so straight, but it's so funny because like they knew how to use guest stars in a way that just wasn't like, hey, it's Sting. Like, yeah.
Well, you said that in the book too. Like the Homer Palooza is not in the top 10, but like the way they use Peter Frampton is just perfect. Like, of course, like first of all, how is Peter Frampton in this episode? And second of all, like of course Peter Frampton's in this episode. Nothing has ever fit better.
Yeah,
than this cameo.
Well, they wanted Bob Dylan, and I think he obviously said no. But like Frampton,
yeah.
Frampton was perfect because he was sort of like, I mean, I think he was still performing, but like he was sort of the perfect like self-effacing rock star who was like considered washed up. And he said to the casting director, he's like, "Wait, do you want me to be like a washed up rock star among these like young people?" And she was like, the casting director, Bonnie Patilia, was like, "Yes." And he's like, "All right, I'll do it." And like, he owned it and was so funny. Like he's the funniest part of that episode.
For sure. Number 5, Homer the Heretic. This is Homer figures out he doesn't have to go to church. All kinds of fun stuff ensue in this one. This is another one I haven't watched in a long time.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite memes.
Of course.
Is that
warm toasty cinnamon bun?
Yeah, it's like Homer in the bed. I think like, so that's a George Meyer episode, and he was a guy who had like very complicated relationship with his Catholic upbringing. He went to Catholic school, and I think like what interested him, or, you know, what he resented, was sort of like the ways in which religion sort of equates like two things that are not that important. Like basically he would talk about how the nuns would be like, if you chew gum, you're going to go to hell. And I think like he hated the sort of contradiction of, or rather like the equivalizing that goes into like dogma. And so like that episode is a great example of like his sense of humor. And if you remember, Homer regains his faith at the end of the episode. So it's not like he gives it up for good.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great one. I'm due to watch that one. Number 4, already mentioned it a couple times, Marge versus the Monorail. Possibly the most famous episode of The Simpsons ever?
I think so. I think like the music is what really makes it pop. And, you know, and Phil Hartman, who we haven't talked about, is like the secret MVP of the series. Like
Yes.
they would, when they needed something, they'd be like, call Phil. When Tom Cruise turned down a guest starring spot, they were like, call Phil Hartman. He'll do the part as Bart's like macho older brother, like in the Big Brothers organization. And so Hartman as Lyle Landley, the con man, like that's what makes the episode.
God, it's so true. Like I don't know if there's anyone that consistently makes me laugh harder than Troy McClure on the whole show. I mean, it's just, again, it's like if you're stuck on an episode, just somehow shoehorn him into it.
Do you guys have favorite Troy McClure movies?
Oh man, is it Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore? Is that what it's called, or something like that?
Like from
Or Alice
The
Doesn't
Looking
Live
Glass.
Anymore?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the Designated Drivers, The Life-Saving Nerds. That's a good one. Dig Your Own Grave and Save, and I think Get Confident Stupid is the other one that I mean, there's like so many. Yeah.
That's how I mentioned earlier, but Stop the Planet of the Apes, I Want to Get Off is like that's about as good as it gets for me. We haven't talked a ton on just like Conan O'Brien specifically and the whole phenomenon that was him. I mean, a little bit of that's in the book, but you know, any more light on what it was like when he left, what his kind of role was, because it was very like burn very bright for a short amount of time.
He was like a character, like a true character, and I think he is very humble about it because people ask him about The Simpsons, and he's basically like, I was there for like 2.5 years. The train was already rolling. And like, that's the thing. He gets a kick out of the fact that he's associated with like these writers who he described as the dream team, right? Like, but like the writers knew that guy had something special. I don't think they knew he was going to then replace David Letterman on The Late Show, but like he was someone that they liked having in the room. And even if he didn't like write a ton of episodes, he left like the monorail episode will always be forever associated with him, and I think he's proud of that.
Number 3, Mr. Plow, we mentioned, and number 1, Last Exit to Springfield, we mentioned. We haven't really talked about number 2, Lisa's Substitute, which is the Dustin Hoffman episode that you mentioned. I had not watched this in probably 15 years and watched it last night and felt like I got hit by an absolute steamroller.
So many feels.
Many feels. A lot of that was like due to the context in the book, and a lot of that's just because it's one of the greatest episodes of TV ever. But what do you love about this one?
So that, like, you could argue that that's the best episode in this history of the series. You could argue that's like one of the best episodes of TV of all time. Like the one of my favorite things in the show is the contrast between Lisa and Homer, because they're so different. And like that to me is the best example of that dynamic, where Lisa feels very unseen by the adults in her life, particularly her father. And she has this mentor, and you know, that's the thing with like this mentor who's a substitute teacher who's played by Dustin Hoffman, who, you know, his kids were fans of the show. And so, you know, it was still stigmatized to appear on cartoons as a A-list actor. So he appeared as Semitic, you know, like Semitic, like, 'cause he's a Jewish guy. And like, it sort of captured like what having a mentor as a kid is like, where like it doesn't last forever. So Lisa has this positive force in her life, and like she has to learn how to take his influence and advice like without him being there anymore. And it's like truly a tearjerker when you watch. And at the end, like she reconciles with her father, and that's even more touching. And like that episode, I think, like it's hard to pinpoint, but I think for a lot of adults, like they watch that and they're like, wow, this show is moving. Like it's not just snarky. And that was a big moment for the show.
I think what blows my mind is like a room full of men captured such a female canon event so well. I mean, because it's just like every part of Lisa in that episode, down to reconciling with Homer and their differences, is just like I'm like, wow, just how it blows my mind every time, because I had also rewatched that episode.
Yeah, and so that was like a James L. Brooks idea, which should not shock anybody. He's like the master of romantic comedy, and like John Vitti, who wrote it, like was really intimidated because he's like, fuck, how do I do this? Like, how do I please James L. Brooks? And I think he proved to everybody that you don't need to write a joke every 2 seconds on The Simpsons. Like, it can be emotional without being like snap, 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 joke, joke, joke. But yeah.
I had never thought about it this way, but I think there's a quote in the book about how it was it 60s Batman mixed with Mary Tyler Moore.
Yes.
You know, and I feel like that's a pretty good example of that, especially with the class election going on at the same time, which is just the most absurdist thing ever. But no. Well, Alan, I could truly do this all day, every day, talk about The Simpsons. But really, really, really appreciate your time, Jordan. Anything else before we get out of here?
This is probably such a silly question, and you do talk about it in the book, but I have to know, did you go to Simpsons World for your reporting, and how was your experience there?
Simpsons World?
Yeah, or the theme park extension at Universal.
Oh, yes. Yes, I've been there. It's surreal. I loved it the first time I went. It's like there's just like like the Homer line at the candy convention. Like I feel like a kid in some kind of a store. Like just going there for the first time, like I was very wide-eyed, like going to Moe's and like Krusty Burger, and the ride is even pretty good. And yeah, I love it. I want to go back. It's been a long time. But you know what we haven't talked about is like any golf connections in the show.
That's true. There's what is it, Lee Carvalho's
putting challenge,
yeah,
which is the video game that Marge gets Bart when she doesn't want to get him Bone Storm. It was like the height of Mortal Kombat. And also like there's an early episode
Bone Storm, I forgot.
Yeah, where Rod Flanders and
the
Dead Todd
putting one.
Yes, they have a miniature golf contest, and one of the announcers sort of talks about, he references like, you know, like the 18th hole at St. Andrews or something like that. Like it's very, the writers were big sports fans, so they would try to mimic like sports broadcasts, and Sam Simon loved that scene in the episode.
The other big golf connection, where my head always goes, is the Johnny Cash episode. You know, where he wakes up on the putting, like the mini golf course, after eating the Insano pepper.
And there's the
Spirit Quest.
Mr. Burns, you know, use an open face club to sand wedge.
Scene from the class struggle.
Yeah. Yes, that's a great one. Open face club sandwich. Yeah.
Well, Alan, thank you again. Thanks for a great book. I had such a fun time reading it, and it was really great to catch up with you. The book again, Stupid TV, Be More Funny: How the Golden Era of The Simpsons Changed TV and America Forever. Alan Seagull, thank you very much for hopping on.
Thanks to you both. I appreciate it.